Oh, good. I call to order this meeting of the Issaquah School Board. Today is Thursday, January 12th. The board has been in a work study from 5 to 6 p.m. For strategic planning, and then an executive session until about 5 minutes ago, 6:50. Note that we have Director Gallinger joining the board meeting online with us, but he is here in the meeting. At this point, would everyone join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you. What we'd like to get started with is normally our public comment, but first we have an introduction of a new administrator. So Superintendent, I will pass it to you.
Great. Thank you, President Mullings. I'd like to welcome Marcel Hauser, our district's senior advisor and strategy team member, and introduce him to the community and invite him to say a few words. He joins ISD after having served as the Director of Strategy and Project Management in the Issaquah School District. In that role, he led the district's strategic planning process, including stakeholder engagement, equity plan alignment, external research and data analysis, meeting facilitation, plan creation, all of that resulting in a unanimous board approval of the 5-year plan in that district this past fall. Prior to his work in Mukilteo, Marcel was a continuous improvement project manager with the Seattle Public Schools. In that role, he led the remote learning task force efforts and led the district's secondary grading strategic initiative, resulting in the creation of equity-aligned grading practices. Marcel is a graduate of Marcel is a University of Washington graduate, and he holds an MBA. This is a long list, so I have to get it right. He holds an MBA, a master's in data analytics, and certifications in project management and Lean Six Sigma. I will let him introduce himself and welcome Marcel.
I apologize for the long list. Good evening, President Mullings, board directors, Superintendent Toyek. Excited to be here. Thank you to everybody. It's been a warm welcome the last 4 days. So coming in 4 work days and the support I've definitely felt welcomed and invited to the space. So my family and I just recently moved into the area. So we're in neighboring city, Redmond. So pretty close. We're looking forward to diving in deeper at Issaquah and diving in and creating and working with the community here. One of the things that drew me just to go into the why Issaquah for me, it was really about the innovation and the journey forward with the strategic planning process. So that was a signal toward really looking to prioritize the work and digging deeper into terms of what is important for students and what's going to drive student outcomes. So I'm really excited about joining that work, joining a strong team. So my time here so far, I've seen nothing but just, I'm really trying to keep up with some of the conversations and the team here. So really sharp team, excited to be here and look forward to the journey going forward.
Welcome. Okay, the next section is on public comment. I do not have any public comment in the room. Is there any public comment on the phone? No? Okay, thank you. So next on our agenda is the approval of our consent agenda. The consent agenda is a meeting management tool whereby the board is able to pass multiple items in one motion. The consent agenda items have been reviewed by the board prior to this meeting. Any board member may remove an item from the consent agenda and place it on the regular agenda for discussion. You can see that listing in the below in the agenda. Do I have a motion?
I move the consent agenda be approved as presented.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Consent agenda is passed. Okay, we have next the establishment of the regular agenda. Superintendent, are there any changes to the regular agenda?
No changes.
Outstanding. So let's go on to our first formal agenda item, and that is a recap of the work study that we did just prior to the board meeting. As I mentioned, we had that meeting earlier today. This is an opportunity for the board superintendent to share any learnings, any insights from the session. So I'll open it up to the board. Who wants to get us started?
Look at me. It felt a little whirlwind. It moved fast, but we covered a lot of information, talked about how to establish the vision for our district, talked about the strategic planning team had met with all of the administrators and all the members of the board. So they are starting to get very familiar with Issaquah and the things that we do well and the things that we see we can improve. We had information specifically that came from the teachers, that came from students. They met with students, which is great, that came from administrators. And then we did a little interactive discussion of how to create a vision statement, which was kind of fun. It made us think really hard about each and every word that we might put in a statement. And the exciting part for me is this is just the beginning. And so it felt whirlwind. It felt like there was a lot of information coming at us all at once. But I can also see that as we get into it and we get the community more involved and gather a lot of input from people, that we are going to come up with something really amazing and something that we are going to be able to implement. So.
Yeah, I thought it was a good conversation, really created the framework around, starting at the top with our mission and vision and going deeper into more specific strategy or goals and strategies or, in their pyramid. And then as far as the vision statement, it's important that, every word matters. And what does the word mean to different people? It can have different meanings. And so as we go to create this vision statement, we have to, taking in all this input really helps so that we're clear about what we mean with the words we're going to end up with. And we want real buy-in to that vision, because that vision is what's going to set us on a path for, the near-term goals and 3 to 5 years and even longer-term goals. So I was excited with the depth of thought around the work that is going on.
Well, I think I really appreciated how much work had been done by our consulting firm in talking with students, talking with staff, because this is not about the board from the top down designating what our strategic plan is. This really is looking at the district as a whole and the participants within it deciding what is important and just how much alignment there really was in some of those conversations about what our strengths were, what our areas of opportunity are, that even amongst students, amongst staff, amongst the administration, that there was alignment. And every time I found myself nodding at all of those things, that it's things that we've identified. So how do we build something, a strategy to address all of those things in a meaningful way? And I think, we talk about getting input, and I know so often it's kind of funny we didn't get any public input today, because we have an active community that shares their values with us at every meeting, and this is our opportunity to say we hear you.
Any thoughts from you, Director Gallinger? At this time, thank you, Superintendent.
I want to just say thank you to the board for prioritizing and focusing on this work individually, but collectively. And I just appreciate all of the work also that has been done to collect feedback about the future of Issaquah, going back to the superintendent search. So it's not just the inputs recently that can be considered. It is also the feedback that was incorporated into how you crafted the job description, how you went about the process for selecting me, I guess, and also throughout my time and taking the charge of really engaging and getting my own feet on the ground to meet with people, to hear from different constituent groups, to be in our schools, and to really focus on that level of outreach and relationship building. So all of those inputs and lessons along the way from the first 100 days certainly fits in. And we do have a lot of surveys and a lot of other data from thought exchanges throughout the past year that can also provide inputs into where we will go in the future and how we will prioritize. So I want to say thank you and just appreciate all the work that has been done previously to get to this moment in time.
Wonderful. Thank you. I know for me, I was really happy with the idea of looking out 50 years in the future and thinking about where did we want to be and what's the experience we want for our students, and then figure out how do we back up from there on the steps we need to take. So I'm excited about the work and look forward to the upcoming milestones. So thank you. With that, we can move on to a discussion. It's been a week of input. So we had the board town hall 2 nights ago. We hosted that here on January 10th in the administrative building. So first time we did it on our home court, as I like to call it. And also the first time we were able to, or maybe brave enough to invite in our remote participants with our in-room participants, which I know we're working on, and we're very grateful for Director Gallinger of stewarding us through a lot of those conversations. So I thought it'd be a great time for the board to also give any insights or feedback on that session as well.
On this one, I went back afterwards and reviewed all of the little Menti bubbles, and a couple of things stood out. One was there was quite a bit of gratitude from the Zoom room of thank you for including us. So glad we could participate and not have to, get in our cars and schlep to wherever. The other thing I saw that initially kind of disturbed me was, people were saying, well, the board was talking more than listening. And I realized that I think maybe we weren't clear enough in the board's mind, in our collective mind, as it were. Town halls are about come, ask us questions, and we will respond. So it is kind of about the board talking. Whereas we also have something that we call listening sessions, where we will broach a couple of issues and say, we want to hear from you, we want to understand your experiences, and we won't say anything. And though for the board, those are 2 very different things. And I think what happened, at least on a couple of those bubbles, is people came in expecting a listening session and they got a town hall and they were disappointed. So maybe it's incumbent upon us to be a little more clear up front about what we think a town hall is. But otherwise, I thought the questions were interesting. I appreciate the number of people that showed up in person. There were like 20 people in the room. And then, I don't know, another 20 on the Zoom. So it was one of the better turnouts that we've gotten at a town hall. So, as long as people keep on showing up, I guess we'll keep on doing them.
Yep, it seemed to get positive feedback from most of the people that were there. Appreciated the opportunity to be able to ask questions and hear from the board. Sound like they want even more. So we'll have to see about that. Yes, how to do that.
Anything you want to add, Director Gallinger?
I would just say it reminded us that we have a lot of focused listening sessions to do. COVID interrupted our ability to do our elementary school listening sessions. And so we probably do need to start those sometime this spring. Not that calendaring is something easy for us to do.
Yes, that's true. Thank you for that, Superintendent. Any thoughts from you and your attendance? No, thank you.
I did want to bring up one topic that percolated, that I thought was helpful to provide some more details on, because I did see feedback and questions that were maybe more about the district being able to answer in a greater detail. And so I wanted to step into that a bit and address the topic of hate speech. We do have several policies that address hate speech, and specifically, our 3207 policy, prohibition against harassment, intimidation, bullying. We have a 3241 and a corresponding procedure as well around classroom management, discipline, and corrective action. We also have a student code of conduct, and we have an equitable code of conduct. So these are all areas that, all policies and conduct codes that help allow us to be better with each other and to support our students. I want to note that for discipline, there are state laws that focus on redirecting discipline as not punitive, but supporting a more positive and supportive form. And it actually asks us as districts and as educators to at least have one other form of discipline to support the student in meeting behavioral expectations prior to any kind of exclusionary practice. So that's just some detail around where the topic of hate speech is addressed in multiple ways. Bottom line is you got to see, if you see something, you got to say something. And we need that to happen. We have multiple ways of reporting. We have an online tip and or reporting mechanism for both safety and harassment, intimidation, and bullying. And then there's always building administrators and teachers and adults who can help as well. Our secondary principals in our cabinet have all co-authored and signed a message about the power of language as well. It's really making clear that we want to enlist our families, and we sent this message out before in December, for the new year, to enlist families to also be attentive and supporting and having those conversations as well with our students. So we do need to do more collectively to educate and to continue to discuss the power of language.
Thanks for that. I think for me, lover of town halls, as I am, I think it's really important that we're having those connection moments. I recognize that they can be a bit dissatisfying for people depending on what they showed up or what their intention they brought into the room. So I agree with your comment, Director Weaver, that I think we have an opportunity to make a couple things more clear, which is, one, you did a wonderful video on what is the role of the school board that we pushed out and hundreds of people have seen, but I think we can make that a little more front and center so people can have readily available what our role is in the governance part of the district. And so when they participate with us in those forums, can be a little dissatisfying if you want very specific operational information, and that's not what you get. Again, please work within your buildings on some of those items. But I think we can clarify as well our intention with the sessions and share a little bit more broadly as we've started these little snippet videos of exactly what is our goal and help in that interaction as well. But overall, I think it's great. And I obviously the attendance says that they matter and they're useful to folks. So we'll continue to do that. I think Director Gallinger's right. We have some listening sessions to schedule to do more of more ears, less talking as well. And we'll keep scheduling the mix of those different forms as we go forward. Yes, Director Moraldo.
Yes, so I think the conversation that Superintendent Talyuk was talking about especially around discipline, I think it might help us at some point to put on our agenda items somewhere, whether it's a work study, to really talk about how has state law impacted what we've been able to do discipline wise, and how are our strategies working inside the building? What do you do when a student is defiant and not going into a classroom with the understanding that they know that what are you really able to do to make them do something they don't want to at that point? Ultimately, I would like all school to be so engaging. Kids want to go into class. That would be my answer. But really, what are those strategies? Because as I was going home, I was thinking of all the ways that we used to have triggers that we would be able to do that we don't have now, right? For reasons that we want to support students. So we're trying to do what's best for students and have better outcomes. If a kid's, defiant and doesn't want to go to class, suspending him and sending him home is probably not the best option. You're giving them what they want. So what really are those strategies? So I think it would be good for us to have a conversation about that. Or maybe it's even, as we're discussing with legislators about impacts to decisions that they make. What are some of those decisions around discipline?
Thanks. Any other comments on this topic? Before we go on, thank you. Okay, next we have some student input on our EL 10, which is the structure of schools. Do we, Executive Director Zira, are you joining us up as well? I don't see. Oh, there she is. Joining us as well with our students.
We have Mia and Tharang here, and whichever one of you wants to go first, they're here to provide their input for EL 10. So you want to just reintroduce yourself and then go ahead.
Yeah, and if you could give us your name and your school, just because we forget.
Hello, I am Mia Williamson, and I'm a student representative from Liberty High School, and I'm here to give input on Executive Limitation 10, Structure of Schools. So due to this year's schedule change at Liberty, this is a big topic to cover. There's a lot of student opinion, so I'll try to jump through the first 3 points of the EL and then get through that first. Classroom interruptions. Students don't see this as an issue. They're fairly minimal. The only exception would be assemblies. While we do have flex time on Wednesday afternoons dedicated for assemblies and things like that, we still have had some assemblies on Friday afternoons that have cut into class time. School calendar, which includes breaks and days off. There will always be students who respond to my surveys with all caps, please, for more breaks. But most people said that they felt like they're good. There was more arguments against homework load than actual bell time, so I didn't include that as much. But one student did suggest that Wednesdays start at the same time as every other day, but just have early release to keep their sleep schedule constant. Bell times and extracurriculars. Again, a lot of these complaints were hinged on workload as opposed to the actual bell times. Another student suggested an earlier start and earlier release because of students who work or just more time after school to bounce around extracurriculars. One student athlete in particular said that they've had to leave early for games on 7-period days, which means our class periods are shorter. They end up missing the entire class. With block period days, they only miss some of the class, and they have the beginning of the period to talk to the teacher, so they prefer block period days. Bell times and student health, which is physical, mental, social, emotional. Students generally see school as one of the biggest things that can hurt their mental health. A lot of people said that a later start and release time would help, both physically to get more sleep and mentally to just recharge, again, with more sleep. They said that when we have all 7 classes in one day, it's mentally taxing to jump around between subjects. And some people asked for a longer lunch for a bigger mental break in between classes. Now I'll get into the shift to the 7-period schedule. So if you didn't know, up until last year, or up until this year, sorry, Liberty used to have an 8-period schedule. So we'd have periods 1 through 4 one day, and then 5 through 8 the next day, and then we would just alternate. But now we have a 7-period schedule, and Monday, Thursday, Friday, we have all 7 periods, and the other days are block days. Some overall complaints is that homework load has increased dramatically on the 7-period days. Having all 7 classes in one day and only one day to get our homework done is a lot for some people, especially when we're used to having every other day for the block schedule. One person didn't mind the schedule until the homework from the 7-period days started piling up, and then they had an issue with it. One of the biggest complaints I encountered was the loss of our 8th period. A lot of people said they feel like they're losing learning opportunities to get more credits, and most importantly, opportunities to take classes that they want to take. People feel like they don't have the opportunity to take classes they want to take. Like for me, I would love to take AP Stats next year, but I don't have another period for it. I had a running start student say that the schedule is hard for them to keep track of. And then I recalled that one student in my theater class has to be late to our class every Tuesday because of her running start schedule, and there's nothing she can do about it. Flex time. So on our Tuesday flex time, students just feel like it's homeroom. We have SEL lessons, things like that, and we don't feel like we can get stuff done in Tuesday classes. And then our Wednesday classes, when we can choose where we go, it's only 50 minutes. And for some retakes or taking tests, 50 minutes is not enough to get things done. The 50-minute periods, some people think, are too short because they only have time for lessons. They don't have time for more practice or to ask teachers questions, which makes it harder for students to solidify their learning. For classes like band and orchestra, they barely have enough time to set up their instruments, tune, warm up, then learn some songs, and then they have to pack up again. And having longer class periods makes their time much more efficient. Again, this was a mixed bag. Some people said that 15-minute periods are a lot easier to focus in, and some people said it doesn't give them enough time to learn. The same thing happened with 80-minute periods. Some people said they can't sit through those long classes, but some people said it was great to have a lot of time to learn. People did mention that the quality of their homework on block days seems to be better when they have more time to complete it. Overall, a lot of people asked for the 8-period schedule back. Some people just asked to choose between block days and all 7 periods in one day, but people don't really seem to be a fan of doing both. Just like during online learning, first semester, we had all 8 periods in one day for some days, block periods for the other day. And by second semester, we were doing just block periods because people really didn't like having all their periods in one day. Interestingly enough, a lot of seniors really didn't like the 7-period schedule, and a lot of freshmen were okay with it. I think that while the seniors just may be more stubborn because it's what they're used to, the freshmen also are more used to the current schedule because having 6 periods in one day in middle school is similar to what we have now. So that gave me hope that in the future, students and teachers will adjust to the 7-period schedule and resistance will decrease. A lot of people did say that they appreciated seeing their teachers more. And that was good to hear considering that was a big point in changing the schedule. And people said that the schedule wasn't as bad as they thought it would be. There was only some people who said they loved the schedule, but they were still there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mia.
That was really thorough. Thank you very much.
So my name is Tarang Galela. I'm the student rep from Skyline High School. So we didn't have like a schedule change or anything. We've been having the 7-period schedule from quite a few years. And I think in COVID, it changed a bit. So I circulated a survey among students at school, and I talked to some of my peers in different classes about their satisfaction with regard to the way that the school day was scheduled. And overall, people were pretty fine with it. So in terms of instructional times, most of the students felt that they received like uninterrupted instructional times and that the teacher was able to engage with them appropriately. So for example, assemblies in flex times on Wednesday in the afternoon gave students the right amount of time during class to complete assignments and all of that. Students also felt that the district calendar was quite helpful for them. So for example, one of the students I talked to said that she really felt that, you know, having more long weekends or more breaks in the second semester really helped her because it helped her feel like the workload was less and she had more time to like relax and, you know, I guess take care of the workload that she had from classes. In terms of bell times, most students were satisfied with them and they appreciated the late start on Wednesdays because it allowed them to either sleep in, finish some like work, or attend some club that they were part of. In terms of flex times, there was more social, emotional, something that came up quite frequently with people who I talked to was that there was a lot more social, emotional learning lessons. So they felt that they had fewer flex times than the year before, and they wanted to have some more flex time in order to, you know, meet with teachers, ask them questions, retake quizzes or tests and things like that. But overall, I would say that students are quite satisfied with the amount of instructional time they receive in class and that the way the school day is structured. Yes, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tarang. Any questions or thoughts or comments on that input?
Good.
Director Gallagher, anything from your end? Wonderful. Great job. Okay, we're going to continue on with the agenda. And let me stop for a second. So that input will go into as we look to review and monitor those policies. That's input that we'll be thinking of or have in our consideration as well. And I know that you sent written documents, and so those will get shared with everyone as well. So
but it would be great if you were able to attend the meeting where we review that EL, because again, as we get into our conversations and have questions or comments, it's really nice. It's always nice to have students participate in the discussions. So if you're able to do that, that would be awesome.
Okay, Superintendent, next we have works in progress.
All right. Well, first and foremost, this is School Board Recognition Month. So you know what that means because you've gone through this before. I know what that means because I've also seen and been through this before in other ways. So January, this month is, oh gosh, we're nearing almost 30 years, but I think we're still just shy of that. But we're in 3 decades of Washington State proclaiming, a School Board Recognition Month. And I want to read the proclamation from Governor Jay Inslee, because I think that's an important part of recognizing the board. And so the proclamation reads, whereas the mission of Washington's public school system is to ensure that all students achieve at high levels and possess the knowledge and skills to be responsible members of a democratic society and enjoy productive and satisfying lives. And whereas Washington's 295 locally elected school boards of directors and 9 elected educational service district boards are the core of the public education governance system in our state, serve more than 1.1 million students, have a combined annual budget of over $15 billion, and employ approximately 120,000 people. And whereas school boards play a critical role in promoting student learning and achieving by creating a vision, establishing policies and budgets, and setting clear standards of accountability for all involved. And whereas school board directors are directly accountable to residents in their districts and regions, serving as a vital link between members of the community and their schools. And whereas school boards and ESDs, educational service districts, provide a passionate voice of advocacy for public schools and the welfare of school children. And whereas it is appropriate to recognize school board directors as outstanding public servants and champions for public education. I don't need to read the declaration by the governor, but I want to personally say that, and this came up in the town hall as I think Director Gallagher was speaking. You're volunteers, and so that takes time. And for many of you, this is a dual job, and it takes a lot of effort to spend time with our district, our community, our staff, many people. And your lives are very busy, and you've chosen to do this work. You've stepped up and you've chosen, and that is seen and that is heard from my point of view and from many others beyond just this room. So there's a gift for you here that you see. Harlan does not, Director Gallagher does not see his yet, but he will. We can have maybe someone take a snapshot and send it to you so you can see it. But it's really just a token of our appreciation and a signal of our gratitude. So I want to thank you. You're also a board of distinction. That has been a consistent award given to this board for many, many years. And I wonder if Director Moore would like to say anything as a present from last year to share a few words. And before I do that, I will just say that this board has nearly 55 years of collective board leadership. I'll say that again, nearly 55 years of collective leadership. And I say that deliberately because we are a team, but as a board, 55 years is very outstanding and certainly a milestone.
That is an amazing number. I have never thought to add that up like that. I do so appreciate this board. Last year, and well, actually the last few years, right, between COVID and our work to hire a new superintendent, which we went through last year, took a lot of time and effort from the board because we really wanted to do it right, and I think we did. But I appreciate all the availability of the board and the flexibility to make the work that we needed to do happen, so that we could move through that process and engage as much as possible with our community as we did it. So we do indeed have a board of distinction, and I thank you all for the work that you do.
Well, I think the other thing that stands out, I think it was Director Gallagher that pointed this out when he joined the board, is the Issaquah board really does travel in a pack. When there's a training opportunity, some of us don't go, all of us go. When there are conferences, when there are just various things to do as a board, we all go, we all show up. And I don't think that's the norm. So congratulations to this board for being that committed.
Well, and I would say thank you to those in our community that continue to support us by voting for us. So we are here to serve our public, and they continue to allow us to do that. So I do appreciate that. I was thinking today, if I had that the seniors that graduated this past June were kindergartners when I started this. So it's been an entire generation of students that have come through.
All right. Well, thank you. Congratulations on the collective 55 years of service. I love it. It's contributions of service to our district and our community at large and generations of children. So thank you. I'm going to switch gears and talk about a couple of things, actually many things. I have 2 pages of things to talk about and works in progress. First, I want to recognize that Dr. Dana Bailey has stepped up into a expanded role and oversight as the Chief Academic and Student Success Officer. And the hope there is to bring and tie together all of our work to serve all of our students across teaching and learning and special services. And it's important that we continue to bring that consistency and cohesion to each and every student's experience in the Issaquah School District. So I want to just pause and recognize Dr. Dana Bailey. Thank you for stepping in, as always. What's been top of mind this past week, and I'll sort of start with that and then talk about some media topics. There's been a lot of windstorms. So, weather is a hot topic in the Issaquah School District, as I get to talk a lot about with Jason Morris, Martin Turney, Leisha Engels in the morning, sometimes as early as 4:45 a.m. And they're talking about it even earlier with other team members starting at even 4 a.m. So just want to recognize that our Issaquah Middle School, Creekside, Newcastle, Maple Hills, and Cascade Ridge all experienced power outages in the past, week. And I want to appreciate the principals and staff at those school sites for making sure that learning happened, because we only had one day that we had to cancel a day, which was at Creekside on Tuesday. And our facilities and our maintenance department teams have to respond to the various effects of windstorms, including fallen trees, as a result that, result even further power outages in some cases. And, we also have to adjust quickly on our plans for lunch. So if the power goes out in the middle of the day, we still have to feed our students. That means we don't have access to our ovens, which means we have to figure out quickly how to serve a cold lunch or transfer food from another building to another building, which is in and of itself not a normal daily occurrence. So it takes some maneuvering to be successful at. So just thank you to a whole variety of people, including the folks that I mentioned, in terms of making sure that school happens. Even thinking about EL10 and trying to minimize disruption, we want to minimize disruption to learning. And so we take it very seriously. We have to suspend a school day. I wanted to bring forward a couple of media items and link this really much to Executive Limitation 1, which is around ensuring, that we have a strong forward-facing public image. And in particular, there was an article recently, or an editorial in the Seattle Times titled "Incarcerated Kids Need Libraries Too." Really what it was saying, good news, which is that there's a library at Echo Glen, which is awesome. But I also had a chance to speak to one of the sources cited in the article, and want to be really clear that, until recently, there was some miscommunication, I believe, and misintent around how that source and information got represented. And we have submitted a letter to the editor to correct the record and state our position. And I'll read that out loud, which is, we certainly agree that all students need access to libraries, but it's likely that your sources don't have the full picture of recent history at Echo Glen School. The state's Department of Children, Youth, and Families never provided funding for a library or library services at Echo Glen. Instead, until recently, Issaquah School District teachers and classified staff members donated their own time, money, and materials to provide books on tape, and other research materials for students at Echo Glen. In addition, PTSA groups from ISD schools and the Issaquah Schools Foundation donated funds so that Echo Glen teachers and staff members could purchase books for students. Bottom line is we've been doing our best to provide and direct resources to have what I would call a more intentionally curated set of materials. And I want to appreciate Principal Allison Ilgenfritz for her leadership in signing and co-authoring that letter with me. And I'll provide the board with a copy of that after this meeting. Speaking of the Seattle Times, we have had one of our own high school students selected by the Seattle Times as a 2003 Student Voices writer. Rhea Bathina is a freshman at Issaquah High School, and this was announced last week. So according to teachers, because Andrea Zier and I were wanting to make sure we got to hear directly from those who knew the student best. And so Erin Connolly wrote to me that teachers say that we are thrilled that Rhea has been selected as a Seattle Times Student Voices writer. Her passion for making sure that schools are an inclusive space where all students feel valued and supported aligns with our school's mission and goals. Rhea is already such a positive force in our journalism program where she brings important issues to light. We cannot wait to see her writing continue to develop as she gains even more experience writing for the Seattle Times. So that's an incredible news. Another media highlight to share is in the form of King 5, New Day Northwest. Yesterday morning, they did an interview with a parent and daughter in the Issaquah School District, Stella and Marcel Waldman, about the recent release of their book called Field Trip. And I actually have it to show everyone that I got a copy. And Stella is a middle school student at Cougar Mountain Middle School. If you want to peruse this, you can feel free. And the book is co-authored by Marcel and Stella. And it's all about helping students identify and reflect on their emotions during the day. So it's, feel trip. And I love the play on words on that one as well. So I wanted to share that and just highlight several bright moments that have happened with our community. Couple other things I want to just remind the community and that we have kindergarten registration coming up for the class of 2035. So that's happening, and there's a bunch of things that are going to occur at buildings to host events to help with that. Recruitment is in full swing. I just want to share a couple highlights about our recruitment efforts through human resources, which is we're using a new platform called Handshake, and it's on 58 university platforms. And those are platforms that also have a high number of participants and graduates in the programs for special education and school psychology. And one result so far to date of that effort is that we have more school psychology intern applications than we have ever seen. And that's incredible. That's been a traditionally, shortage area as well. So that pipeline coming in is promising. And I want to appreciate Assistant Superintendent Donna Hood for the efforts to go at a lot of these recruitment spaces and to think creatively and just make the outreach. If you don't ask, you don't know. Another effort has been through ValPAC inserts, which I mentioned at the town hall. But these inserts promote our work, and basically we're the second insert in the envelope. So as you flip through the ValPAC, you might get tired after the first 10, but if you're in the first couple, you actually will see it most likely. So that increases our chances. Basically it's being sent to 10,000 unique addresses. So that's some good news there. And it actually, I think we'll have even higher reach as we think about which additional zones we continue to promote that. And we'll just end with two things. One is we talked about the strategic plan. That's a big effort. So that is underway, and we're starting and stepping into the budget conversation for this year tonight as well. So those are two top priorities that our team will be centered on and working in partnership with you all to support what comes next. So I want to just highlight that. And then I'll end with a great story from my school visit this week to Cascade Ridge. I asked a few fourth graders, initials B and L, about what would you tell my son about why he should attend Cascade Ridge? And they said learning, fun, safety, and school rewards, classroom rewards. So that was pretty awesome and really fun. With that, that's everything for me.
That's fantastic. Any questions or comments on all that? All that pretty cool. The book is amazing. So congratulations to them.
That is awesome.
I have to share that more. Thank you with that. So with that, our next section is monitoring report for and 2 part 1. This will be a section that we will open up for public comment. We'll do that after we've had a chance to hear from the superintendent and the administration. I would like a motion. Thank you.
I move the board accept the monitoring report for E2 Part 1 Academics and Foundations as presented.
Second.
Great. I'd like to, as you see, Rich Mellish and Dr. Dana Bailey are making their way up. And I want to first start by saying thank you to the board for the robust feedback that we had on the ENDS interpretation and some initial, comments around how to think about the actual data and evidence. So really appreciate also Rich and Dana for their partnering to adjust course, because this has been a significant change over prior years in our approach to the report for right now, part 1, and then ultimately part 2, as well as the kinds of evidence that we're providing. This report also reflects a lot of partnership with our executive directors of elementary, middle, high school, and equity and family partnership. So just want to give a nod to our team that's also sitting in this room about their contributions. A couple things, just as I said, this is a significant change, really focusing on fewer data points that allow us to go deeper, making connections between the data points that allow us to consider the experience of students as they progress and transition from our system, and what that means in terms of persistence beyond the ISD, and with a focus on opportunity gap closure. So we will use this discussion and feedback and proposed action on the table to incorporate not only our ongoing into our ongoing work, but also our approach to part 2. So with that, I'll just pass it to Rich and to Dana.
All right, thank you. This is Rich Mellish, Executive Director of Teaching and Learning Services. And the Superintendent Tayek just hit a couple of the real highlights of kind of themes throughout there. The only thing that I would add is that I think of some of this as trial ballooning some new ideas of ways of looking at academics and disproportionality and seeing what resonates with the board and what kind of led to really meaningful conversations and trying to understand the many dynamics that lead to both successes in our system as well as disproportionate results in our system. The only other thing that I'd like to highlight before just entertaining conversation and any questions that you have that I can assist with is that I think one of the stories that's hard to really see throughout the report and throughout is just how much our school teams are embracing trying to use real leading indicators and real-time results of students to adjust in real time the learning plans for students and really trying to dig in. So whether that's tiered teams, administrative teams, counseling teams, whether that's looking at DNF rates and whether that's looking at the progress monitoring data we're doing multiple times a year. We're creating protocols throughout our system for staff at the individual level, the classroom level, the school level, and the district level to use this data to be as proactive and responsive as possible. And I think that there's a real growth happening in that. And we're still, in some cases, some of the data you're looking at is new in the last year or so. And so we're still figuring out where the best places to look in the vast amount of data that we get from students to make sure that we can make the best decisions for students in the most timely manner. So with that, I think I'll just, I feel like the report is long enough that there's probably something that you want to discuss. So.
I do the call for comment first, and then we can get in the description. So, so this is an opportunity for the public to give comment on the monitoring report found. If we have any comments in the room. Okay, we have one. Do we have any on the phone as well? Okay, we have one comment in the room, so let's hear that. If you could please come to the microphone, and I'll go back and read all my public comment instructions because we didn't have any to start. So this is an opportunity for a board to receive public statements on items on the agenda. If you have a point of view for this agenda item, we ask that you share it now. This is a time intended to raise issues not unique to any particular student, staff member, or administrator. Rather, it's a time to provide your insights on issues more generally or of a wider concern. As a general rule, the board will not respond to public comment. I ask that you begin your comments by clearly stating your name, school attendance area, limit your comments to 2 minutes. We'll use a timer. The board neither endorses nor censors any opinions expressed in public input. Please keep your comments civil and respectful and avoid personal attacks on others. The audience should refrain from making comments or engaging in applause, but feel free to wave your hands in support of the speaker. You proceed.
Okay. Thank you, board. So I went over some of the data to support the findings, and I just have
I'm sorry, if you could stop and say your name and your school attendance area or the closest school to you.
Wendy Giora, Issaquah High School. So in looking over the supportive data, there were just a couple of things that seemed like outpoints. The first one was the report on a test given on first grade phonics, literacy test. The iReady phonics assessment is a key evidence-based indicator of reading fluency in first and third grade. And in monitoring the progress, it looks like every group, and they're categorized by ethnic groups, every group improved from the fall to the spring by several percentage points, except the Black and African-American children. In the fall, they were at 71%, and in the spring, they had gone down to 59%. So this was a little bit disturbing. And the other one was in the demographic groups, the true cohort SBA testing, comparing the scores from 2019 and then progress or regress made between 2019 to 2022. And when you look at all the students, there was some regression from 2019, 80.1% were at proficiency level for their grade level compared to 2022, went down to 76%. And again, Black and African-American students were at 47.3 and went down to 41.4%.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your comments.
This doesn't look like progression just in those cases. It looks like regression. Thank you.
Any comments on the Zoom, Stephen? No? Okay, thank you for that feedback. So, board, comments, observations?
Well, I'll just start by saying thank you, because I thought the changes in the format and the information were excellent. I appreciated the executive summary, which gave me the highlights of why this is important and what matters about it and what's being done. I thought there was a lot more that tied back to not only what was done last year, but what is being done this year. And I know we're always monitoring in the rears, but it also helps to know what you've learned from last year and what is changing going forward, and how the assessments are following. And I know because some of these are new assessments, some of them we have new baselines because of the changes with COVID. So I know that a lot of work went into creating this report. I appreciated having, excuse me, sometimes before there were a lot of links. So on this, there is some more highest level important information and data actually spread throughout it, which was very helpful to see those. And then also to have the spreadsheets that you attach to go deeper into that, the data behind all of it. So I really did appreciate the work that went into fixing up this format. I'm going to let others focus and then see if there are other detailed ones.
I was going to say, I agree with you. The level of detail in it was very helpful. I'm, lost in a sea of spreadsheets, but the data is good. And much to the public comment is that it did, it allows us to have in one place a real area where we can have a discussion. So during our school improvement plans, being able to really focus in on something that we've talked about during our strategic planning is we know that there are disparities academically. And so what are we going to do about those things? But I thought it was really clearly articulated in so many different ways and so many deeper areas where you could see where those were. It wasn't just in reading, or it's also in writing, and it's in who's accessing AP classes, who's going off to college, and it just continues. And so I think, it really helps us the way it was laid out that takes the blinders off. You can't not look at it and see it. So I do really appreciate all of that. And it gave me a sense that, and you'll probably share this with us, that you could not create that report without having some super meaningful conversations as an admin team. And I think that's one thing about having somebody come in and say, okay, we're going to start from scratch again over this, because it can get stale to just kind of add the data from last year. Whereas I think there had to probably be some pretty deliberate conversations as you're looking at that and putting the report together. So I do appreciate it. I don't think I was prepared for how much time I was going to spend doing that, but it was much needed. And it's a great place to be able to because this is a public report, to be able to point the public. If you really want the data, it is so much of it in one place. And I really do appreciate how it was laid out.
Yeah, I would echo that last remark, that as I was reading through this, I thought, if I'm a community member and want to immerse myself in what's going on in the academics of the Issaquah School District, this is an awesome document. And I also appreciated the fact that although the end does start upon graduation, students will, it felt like we had a lot more information about what's going on at elementary. I guess we've always had the middle and high, but I appreciate that you're not going to be ready upon graduation if you're already behind in the third grade. So it seemed more thorough. It seemed like we're covering the whole 12, 13 years of what our students are doing and how we're preparing them and what we're doing when they're not there. So yeah, I agree with Marnie too. I was not prepared with for how long it was going to take to get through this. There's a lot of information, but I think it's quite good.
Director Gallinger?
Where do I start?
You turn him up.
He's on it.
I'll start with just general comments. Again, one for gratitude for all the work that's been done on this. Specifically calling out disproportionality, I think that speaks to our values, to say and acknowledge, hey, in public comment also said, like, we're not perfect, but until we are willing to talk intellectually, honestly about what our gaps are, we can't then work on what's the plan that we're going to close them and how we as a board can monitor that progress. That being said, I think for me, I'm always feel this tension between how we do things by reviewing previous data, where it just seems like we're admiring the problem rather than talking about, hey, what are we proactively doing right now to use this data to catapult our system into change. And so maybe for a retreat topic to talk about, how could we address that tension, meaning somehow mid-year for us to get some more formative data and conversation. Some things that really stood out to me were, and I'll try and refer to the correct name of the sheet just so board members can follow along. So it was the SBA data summary link, and then clicking on the WA Kids cohort. And it can't be a surprise to anyone that this is data that I'm passionate about because I've asked for this for a long time. But what stands out to me is if when we look at the students in kindergarten who were scoring at 0, 1, and 2 domains and look at their special education identification rate by the time they're 5th graders. So if we know that if they're 0, 1, or 2, and they have a 50% or higher chance of being identified of receiving special services by 5th grade, and we know that at kindergarten, why can't we proactively start serving them in kindergarten? Because this is the whole point of early learning and early intervention. And so I hope, and what I think that is also missing for me on a just general standpoint is we do a lot of hearing about our district, our schools by feeder pattern for school improvement. I feel like this is supposed to be, but it isn't. Sort of like, so what are we doing about, like, what is the district improvement plan or the district approach to some of these larger scale issues? Because our buildings can only do so much and can only react or act in the ways that the system allows, supports, condones. So that's just an initial thing that jumps out at me for what I hope we use this data to translate into system change. So I'll pause there. I definitely have more comments.
Sure. So this is Dana Bailey. We did not embed in this document how many of the students in that kindergarten to 5th grade story had an IEP entering kindergarten. So that's certainly a nuance that we can pull out for you later or in a different way. But your analysis of the data is the same as we see it, that if you start kindergarten with a 0, 1, or 2, there's a 50% chance you'll end up in special education by the end of your 5th grade year. But some of those students entered kindergarten already being served by special services, but we can try to pull that out.
Right. And regardless of if they end up in special services, which your team does a great job with, their proficiency rates are glaringly disproportionate. So all of them looks like would benefit from extra support.
For sure. We don't disagree.
So I guess I'll start with my general comments, and maybe we go back to our next round. And I think, the point Director Gallagher just made is the one that I keep sort of talking about is I appreciate that this is an incredibly simpler way of looking at the data than the last version. I still would really like to get to something dramatically simpler, which is, I think last time I did this, I got to 4 key points along the journey between kindergarten and graduation. Maybe it was 3, but that last conversation is we know at each point along the way. So the WAKIDS is the first one. How many domains does a student is the rating here on the number of ready domains. And we know that there's a deviation point, either excelling or having slower progress toward their goals or kind of staying on the average. And then there's points along the way, reading at 4th grade. I'll go with Fs at 9th grade and then graduation rate. I still think for me, we still clutter those basic points along the way with a lot of other information. And what I'm hoping we can get to, and again, acknowledging that this is significantly cleaner, significantly simpler, easier to read. But what I'm hoping to get to is an acknowledgement of, as we deviated each of those key developmental points, what are the intervention or set of interventions, and how do we track them to the next point if they mattered or they didn't? And so, I think there's almost a want of over communicating all of the bits of information, but I think there's a simpler way to get through the story and a simpler way to then say, what are we doing about it? Now, in the text of what you provided, I do like very much, I think it's page 9. I was just on page 9. And you're for, I think it's 0.6. Right, the walk of the understanding of the disproportionality, where it sits, what the examples are of it. I think that's a very clean and clear acknowledgement. And then following that with, and then the so what of what are we actually doing about it? I think that's fantastic. I would love to see that kind of at those key points along the way. And what are we doing that we know at the next point in the journey that we've had an opportunity to interrupt what we know is going to be the outcome, to the point about which, if they're at 0, 1, or 2 domains, then we have X interventions that we all know we're going to do. And then we can say, did we disrupt that pattern we expected by the next point?
Right. And with that, talking about the intervention and supports, like you have the interventions of these new success blocks, right? And so it's kind of like with that, that you have this new intervention, how are we going to monitor whether that intervention works? And how are we going to measure that? I mean, you also have the addition of the training in like the letters, and how is that training of teachers helping to change that trajectory? And where are we with the number of teachers that are able to be trained in that, so that we are able to support more students that have the challenges that need that support for? I will say one of the things that I really liked in, it's more of your, the statement you're grounded in under the areas of persistent needs, is talking about it's critical that ISD systematically and individually monitor and adjust to address persistent achievement gaps. And I think that's the key that I liked seeing in this. It did feel like it was more individual. You were searching out and finding each student that needed that support. And then we need to monitor to see how those supports work for kids.
I think to Director. Oh, I won't touch it. Sorry. Traditionally, we have seen a dip between 5th and 6th grade. So we would want to watch if the transition between 5th and 6th grade for several more years as we continue to recover. We have a big interest in moving from 8th to 9th grade. And so for our need, and remember who you're talking to, we like a lot of numbers and we like a lot of data, that those formative steps along the way help us track between ages of, say, 5 and 10. So if we just did those high points, we would be missing our own opportunity. If it's not what you want to see, you just have to tell us. But we track that as a really important measure for ourselves, as how are we responding to and how are we measuring the efficacy of the interventions we think are working? What numbers can we put behind that?
And I just want you to pick them. So you tell me there's different ones to pick, but let's pick them, right? At some point, a big system has to move. All of us, all of you, all the teachers, all the students, all the parents. And there's a simplification of whatever, if those are the right key points, I love them. But if we need to be clear on what they are, we need to be clear on how we know that we're hitting a potential challenge at them, and then allow that entire system to rally around. So that people aren't lost in making various potential choices along the vast set of data. So I'm telling you the ones that have resonated with me over the last 4 years now, but I think whatever the right ones are, I think we need to select them so that what's a very large, complex system can rally around them and get to a better result.
I hear and I've taken some notes. I really appreciate that. For the global systemic monitoring, we need to have some really smaller number of key benchmarks. I'll admit that when I look at it, okay, what are my key benchmarks for elementary? Because at elementary, we're going to need little benchmarks along the way so we can take corrective action and make adjustments. And then I think about the same thing for middle school. So I'm like, oh, I can't give up 6th grade and 8th grade. So I do appreciate making sure that when we bring it to you, you want to know what those big benchmarks are that we can say, what are we doing when a student doesn't hit this benchmark? And then the little things that we're doing to progress monitor on the way, we can describe maybe in less detail and make it less complicated. I do want to comment on the success block monitoring real quick, just for clarification. But I don't want to leave this conversation if you.
Well, I'll just say my last thing, which is there's a reason why rulers have big lines and little lines,
There you go.
right? Big lines and little lines, right? And so people can rally around understanding what feet and inches and yards are. It gets really hard when you start getting down to centimeters and quarter inches of what that really means, right? So in order to drive real change, you have to get people rallied around the big marks on the ruler. And then obviously we expect and know that you guys are going to care for all the little tick marks. But I think as I keep spending all my time, professional time on change management, right? In order for the system to work for all of us, they've got to understand what the big hash marks are.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just wanted to make one connection if it wasn't clear that the success block progress monitoring is that 3 times a year for the at the building and district level. It's the 3 times a year phonics assessment in iReady that we use to say, are we moving the needle? Are we budging some of those needs for students? And then we have even more little marks for teachers at the classroom level so that they can monitor on a more regular basis whether or not students are moving along and making progress so that we can get to those bigger progress monitoring. So I just wanted to make that connection because that's why the phonics takes kind of a prominent role in 1st and 3rd grade, because that's how we're monitoring the success blocks.
Esmeralda?
Yeah, so I was almost thinking you're speaking my policy love language with the idea that different parts of the system need to know different information and different level of granular information. I think that for me, that this is still important information that I'm going to dive into. But I think what you're talking about is really moving back towards our dashboard, where we did have what are our key metrics, and amazingly, I think except for the 4th grade reading, maybe even it was on there. I think it was 3rd grade reading, because we were like, that's when you switch from learning to read to reading to learn. But maybe 4th grade is a better place of evaluating that. But those were exactly kind of the things we were measuring. So going back to that, and what it tells me is that it might be good through our strategic planning for us to identify those so that then they become what we are making reasonable progress towards, right? So how do we measure that because at the end of all of this, I will mark a section on this piece of paper that says we are meeting reasonable progress towards what? 13 years I've been asking towards what? And so I think we're getting closer to what you're saying is maybe having those key metrics that we come up with after our plan, our strategic planning, have that at the top of here's the map of where we are, those key metrics, and then going into the detail. But I do appreciate the detail. And like I said, I think every piece needs more information. Certainly our admin staff, who this is a monitoring so much of the system that they would be evaluating, needs those finer marks. And then as a teacher, I'm going to have finer marks about the students in my classroom. And so so I like your ruler analogy kind of helps with that too. But getting down to figuring out what are we making reasonable progress towards? And I think being able to have a section at the top that as part of your executive summary that gives that, I think will be helpful for those of us that may not have 5 or 10 hours to dive into this.
We go back to, oh, sure. Superintendent.
We're working at our signals. I wanted to share, I just wanted to tag on to what Director Moraldo was saying, because it is exactly the hope. And I want to affirm what you're sharing, that through the strategic planning process, we will be able to focus on data that is manageable, movable, and measurable. And the concept of progress monitoring should be happening, not just through our N's and L's, N's and exec implementation monitoring reports, but that it's happening on a regular and frequent basis. And that then leads and supports then potentially a dashboard, right? But that is something I just want to sort of get very concrete with. And that is the hope. And that is the promise of what we are working towards right now.
Wonderful. Director Gallinger, you had more detail you wanted to go into.
Now I want to start talking about some of the data observations that I had. But before that, I think there's just a correction that needs on the table on page 11. If you look at the honors ones, so that the section above that adds up to 100%. The section of percent of students taking honors does not add up to 100. So just FYI. So the first thing I have to say is when I look at the subgroup breakdown for graduation for the class of 2022, that's really incredible. If you can deliver that every year, that would be amazing. So it's some of the smallest gaps I've seen in our subgroups from our overall graduation rate of 96.9% and then across our subgroups. So I think for me, that's what gives me hope. And that's why we as a board and system have been talking about disproportionality for so long. And I don't know if this year or last year's class was a one-off or not, but kudos to the system for that and for what that means to all those students and families. So the specific data, now I'll go to the SBA data. And before Director Mellish, you've talked about how, you really like iReady because you feel like it's really correlated to the SBA. And I just wanted to do a cross check on that because at least the data that was presented to us, when we look at the iReady data to the third grade SBA reading scores, the correlation doesn't look to be that great. So I was curious about your thoughts on that. If it was just this year, there was some weird thing about the correlation or whatnot, but the correlation between the spring iReady reading scores and our SBA scores were not correlating well at all.
Okay, so I'm looking at the third grade tab on the benchmark workbook. Is that what I'm looking at? Is that what you're looking at? The
Sure.
spring iReady next to the spring SBA.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Couple of things, kind of three things for me. I'm looking at it, and for the most part, I'm seeing a fairly strong correlation on that table. So I'd be curious if I'm looking at something differently than you. But before I look at that, I do want you to know that ISD took part in a correlation study with iReady. So they're doing a national correlation and a statewide correlation. And in about 2 weeks, they're going to give us our district correlation report where they're looking at it more deeply. It's funny that you picked third grade reading because I ran a correlation study between our SBA, one-to-one correlation study this afternoon between our iReady reading and SBA, and it had a correlation coefficient of 0.85. So if you want to get into statistics, it actually, which is considered a highly correlated set of data. So when we looked at a one-to-one correlation, the R squared of that, so we actually do have some data, and iReady has assured us. What we do see is that the older the students get, the correlation skews where the scores in iReady will tend to run more and more a little bit lower than the scores in SBA. But we do have a strong correlation there. So unless I know exactly what you're looking at, that you see the lack of correlation, I'm having a hard time to respond much further on that. But I did want you to know we are watching correlation very closely.
Thank you for that response. The second question I had was looking at, so this is the tab of E2 by section is what the title is. And then E2.2 ELA is the worksheet I'm on.
The workbook is E2 by section. It's the extra data for each section of the ends monitoring, and you were looking at the ELA.
Yeah, E2.2 ELA.
Yeah.
And we see a pretty robust interest in ELA honors as people enter freshman, and it stays pretty persistent through sophomore. And then the drop off is pretty dramatic by the time you get to 10th and 11th grade for AP and IB. And it's even more so when you look at the subgroups. So I guess I'm curious to know, and I don't have a student who's gotten that far, so maybe directors Weaver and Moore and Meraldo would be able to provide like insights, because I haven't gotten through the system that far yet. But like, what happens that we have almost 50% of students taking an honors level class by their 9th grade year, and then that drops to very, very low numbers, especially by our subgroups, by the time they're in 11th grade. And so I ask that because as we think about our strategic planning process, that we want students to be achieving or thriving, that we want students to be successful by their own measure and being able to choose their own path. Are we somehow, by the structure of the design, limiting them or closing doors? And
you want to, I was going to give personal experience, but.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the reason why we're taking this approach to monitoring inclusion in these is that we think there's a story to tell, that we need better representation across demographic groups in all of our courses. And in this case, in this monitoring, it focuses our main selections for ELA or advanced or regular or AP IB. But we would say the same thing around our CTE and some of our other highly enriching courses. We'd like proportional or natural proportions in each course. So that is something that is high on our mind as an indicator of progress for us, to have proportional representation in our classes. So I want to affirm that value of that. I'm going to wait to hear more comments before I could speak, or if others at the cabinet have ideas around kind of why we have, as they get older, they choose AP, IB or advanced courses less on that data is a different conversation.
Yeah, I would just say from my experience of having kids go through the high school, that one, there's a big jump going from honors, and I can only speak to AP, but I assume it's similar for IB, but I'll speak to the AP at Issaquah High School. There's a big jump going from honors to AP. And so you lose a certain set of kids that don't want to necessarily rise up to the level of the AP courses. I think you also have kids that are making choices of the variety of classes they want to take and decide where they want to put their focus on their highest level courses. And it might just not, they may not be able to continue every course at an accelerated level. And so they're making choices. So there may be kids who were able to do the honors in ELA type course and math at a certain level and science at a certain level. But as they moved up to their junior, senior year, they're now choosing, okay, well, I really want to focus on math or science. I'm going to do those AP and not necessarily English or social studies, and reverse, right? So you just don't see kids doing all of the advanced necessarily as they move all the way through the system.
Well, and I think there's fewer options at the lower grades for AP, right? Because AP really,
it's more of a
or
junior,
the honors,
senior. There
right.
is like, AP, there used to be AP European studies and the human geography that are at the lower grades, but most of the others are junior, senior.
So you can't fill up 5 AP classes as a freshman, but you certainly could if you wanted to as a senior, right? And so kids are not making those choices. So you're going to see a higher percentage of kids going, well, I can take 1 AP class or 2 AP classes as a freshman.
Right.
But when you get to your senior, you're like, yeah, back that I'm going to do, I plan on being going to an AP chemistry, and that's going to take up way more time.
And
I'm not going to be able to do that.
there was a lot of stress, as I think around the years my kids were in high school, there felt like a lot of everybody's got to do everything. And they tried to kind of change that culture to, you got to balance the load that you have. I mean, some of this goes to the homework load. If you're taking 6 AP classes, you're going to have a lot of homework, right? And you're going to have to deal with that. And so it was trying to help kids think about what balance they want in their schedule to be successful and healthy human beings as they go through it. So that's just my perspective from being there.
And that's great. I just, having not gone through that at all and have no experience yet personally, I want to make sure that it's not like our math pathway in middle school. And that's what concerns me, right? We have talked endlessly about how it's probably too curated of like, you must score this or this before you register for this class type of
Yeah,
thing.
not in my experience of going through the curriculum choosing process, or course choosing process through Issaquah High School, at least. You know, the teachers and administration came around and, you know, really talked with students about what their choices were for courses. I didn't feel it was all limiting, but they did stress to have a healthy balance in what they chose. So, you know, my kids were very math science, and as they got to that very senior year, decided, well, actually it must have been junior year, because it was like they prioritized the AP math and AP science and AP English over taking AP US history. It also doesn't, just, you know, doesn't preclude a student from taking the AP test without having taken the AP course. If that is their motivation to potentially try to accumulate the AP scores towards college. I had a child take the AP test without having taken the AP course and just taking the regular course, and did very fine on it. So.
I would also, but to Harlan's point, and I having not had children in the middle school for a long time now, but that was what I railed against, were those forms that were very almost as like, you will meet this level. And my daughter going, well, even though I got a level 4 on my math test, I didn't get high enough for me to take the 6, 7 or whatever that jump was. And so by 7th grade, I'm like, no, you're taking math 7, 8. You can certainly do this. And so I think it is some of that rigidity. And I don't know if we've moved away from that, because I haven't seen one of those forms. But I think that's some of the question of how many students got kind of pushed into it. But I would say it's really looking at that elementary data. I mean, when you only have 40 or 50% of your Black and African American students passing SBA, they are not going to be taking honors AP, AP English or honors English.
And so it's a good thing we have the executive director of high schools here to make a comment.
Thank you. Andrea's here. Director Moore did a really nice job, but I first want to just make sure that anything I'm about to say is not taking away from the fact that we have work to do on our proportionality in these classes. So not trying to say we're good where we're at. That is work we're going to continue to do, particularly in different areas. As we've looked at before, like we have more girls taking some of our advanced science classes. Our proportionality is great there. So like, what are we doing right there as far as gender in those science classes? But it's worse in some of our computer science classes. And then it's, still lacking in some of our other subgroups. But I think the 3 primary indicators are the availability of Running Start that opens up at junior year. So we see just in general, that is when we lose some of those students that were on the honors path to Running Start that junior year. And then additionally, the same thing that Director Moore spoke about, which is that more AP and advanced offerings, because really those other classes are pathway choices that they're making freshman and sophomore year, like science pathway choices and things like that. And so way more availability of AP offerings come up, AP stats, AP environmental science, AP. So that's where they start to take those pathway, like passion courses. And we actually promote not taking too much as part of our registration process of not taking 6 APs unless you're a student that really feels like you can handle it to help and support mental health and rigor and allow them to do all those things they want to do. So that is a huge reason of why it drops in the humanities. And then just the last thing I'll say is we definitely have changed our course over the last decade around the conversations about prerequisites to learning recommendations. And we really promote that anyone can register for any class that they're ready for. We're really transparent about what the rigor and the class looks like and what the skills are to make sure that they feel prepared. But we do not have prerequisites for any of those classes. And our teachers are pretty intentional about those conversations at the registration point in time in March.
Thank you.
And I'd like to add one that I think is supportive of our vision for 12th grade. We offer a robust selection of elective ELA courses in 12th grade that are really compelling and interesting. So it allows our students, when they make a choice based on their interests, like I want to take Munsters in literature, I want to take dystopian fiction, and they get to do something that is about their interests. And I think that's really good. I know that for me, for my son, when he was in 12th grade, that was really meaningful for him to be able to do that. And I might laugh at his choice of film as lit, but he's currently taking a film as lit at the UW to meet his writing requirement, doing international film and having to write analysis on it. But he's enjoying that. He's getting to pursue his interests. And I think that 12th grade, those very enticing courses that can be interest-based do pull from the AP as well. I personally believe, and I think that's a good thing.
As long as it's not just counseling, that it truly is choice, because having taken about every math and science class that I could in high school, the AP language and literature were two of the most formative classes for me for college and even still today. And so those classes in particular, I worry about seeing just what I see a trend of persistently declining enrollment over the course of the time that I've been on the board. I think that's what I'm worried about. Is those are such important, like prep for college, prep for life classes that I worry that they may be missing out on, and certainly would be missing out on Running Start.
Any more, Dr. Callinger?
I think the only thing that I would say is in preparation for the next one for math, I would really like to see the Algebra 2 broken down by the year that they're taking it and the performance by year. Meaning, if they're taking it in 8th and 9th grade, what is their pass rate? If they're taking it in 10th grade, what is their pass rate? If they're taking it in 11th grade, what is their pass rate? If they're taking it in 12th grade, what is their pass rate? That is probably our biggest barrier class. That's a gateway to further higher level math and then science. And the performance of it by grade would be really important for me to know. And to Sydney's point, I would prefer that we just focus on a few like key moments in our system rather than like globally all data. So thank you.
Thank you. Any more comments, Superintendent? Oh, sorry. You guys are beating each other.
I did, and I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me because I've just had technology issues tonight. But what I thought was really interesting is some of the post-grad data. I felt it was much deeper than we had seen in the past. And so one of the things that I want us to be cautionary of when we're looking at the data is looking at, we have a great grad rate, but when you start to dig into that, what are our graduates doing? It then falls along those same disproportionalities around race and around socioeconomic status as to what they're able to do post-grad. And you're seeing that the most affluent students are the ones that are making up most of that 68% going off to a four-year college. So for me, it's less, it's somewhat about the performance, but it's about what came up during the town hall. What kind of classes and pathways are we building if we know that if you are a middle class income, $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year family, you're not going to be able to qualify for federal support because of the nature of that salary in a national world or a national position. And then, but you're not going to have that pocket of money to be sending every one of your kids to a four-year college necessarily. So what pathways are we creating into apprenticeships, whether it be in aerospace apprenticeships, even electronics or plumbing, the trades. So what are we doing for students that they have a path outside of a four-year college that's deliberate, like actually starting to feed that passion in that direction so that they're ready for that next step to be able to go into that and find success. Because it just comes down to not every student is going to go to college. I think one of the things that over the past decade, we've really talked about, not every student should go to college. Why are you getting yourself so far in debt? But what are the options are we providing, especially for low-income families, to be able to make a better living for the next generation of kids coming out of that? So how do we ensure that their families can grow economically from one generation to the next?
I'm going to make this quick, but you bring up something that I think is really important. And we're sitting square in the middle of this process at the moment. And I do think there's a conversation to be had, not dissimilar. Where did Adria go? Not dissimilar to the conversation we had about perceived accessibility to athletics and activities, where what are we doing to help all of our students understand what's available to them and what is possible for them as they make these decisions, and how many and families are making some presumptions of what support may or may not be available, and so not seeking the next step in the process. And so I think there is a bit of a tweak in counseling potentially to make sure that people are self-selecting out without knowing what either pathways they might go down besides four-year college, or at least how that might be funded, financed, or supported. I don't think today that's super clear, and there may be external partners that we help provide, but I think there is a gap there with folks selecting out of that process because of some assumptions of what's potentially possible for them based on current family or socioeconomic conditions. So I would say that has become an interesting part, again, where families of means are allowed, have more resources available and also more presumptions of what they will do next, being one of those, right? And seeing other families who may make presumptions that the next step isn't possible for them or isn't available to them. So I will just say, in a similar way that we talked about how do we remove some of the potential perceived barriers, that might be another interesting conversation. But Superintendent, you were going to say something.
I was going to say thank you. This has been a helpful discussion. And just thank you. Yeah, to everyone for the discussion and for the work leading up to this.
So we have a motion on the table to approve. I remember that. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you.
And before we move on, I didn't really get clarity on like the follow-up stuff that I put at the bottom of my little paper here. Okay. Like usually I have bullet points that I can speak to, and I don't know that I have bullet points this time.
Okay, wonderful. Next on our agenda, which will be for discussion only and no action this evening, is a discussion of our 2023-2024 budget development guidelines as we start what will be a series of multiple conversations about budget as we go forward. So I see we've had our CFO approach the dais. Superintendent.
Great. Yes. CFO, COO Martin Torney will be presenting on this, but I'll just set the stage, which is it's very important for us to have a public process and discussion by which we hear from the board on the guidelines that then can be incorporated into the specific details that a board might consider adopting as we go forward with the budget process. So it's very important to hear from you all and to get clarity on that as we move towards budgeting and the prioritization of how we will frame that process and also the values that go into that.
Is your mic on?
No.
Is that better? Thank
Yes.
you. I can hear myself. That's it. Thank you. So Stephen, I think it's the last group there. Yeah, we'll do that one first. And if you could just go to the second slide. Guys, thank you again, Martin Turney, Chief of Finance and Operations. This is the time of year where we typically develop those board budget development guidelines. And so as mentioned, this would be for discussion today. We brought the prior year guidelines as a way to kind of begin the conversation and have a couple of slides here. Just to kind of recap and summarize the feedback from November 10th when we had a work session regarding the budget. We had a brief update. So that's just to aid in this conversation as we talk about the upcoming budget for 23-24, and then of course possible action on these budget guidelines at the following meeting, January 26th. And for that meeting, we also bring a timeline of target dates and critical milestones. So can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so for priority and direction, so these are the things that we noted from that work session. Some of the consensus items that we pulled, one being aligned to the strategic plan, focus on equity and directing resources to areas of highest need, change things up. Another way to say that is to innovate or be innovative, adhere to board ends, as is typical. Use a revenue generating mindset to ensure costs are covered for fee-based activities. And in terms of process, expand on the impact of prior reductions. So to give context to those, frequent and consistent communications, engage with union groups, community involvement, provide a menu of options for consideration to the board. And of course, follow EL4, EL5, and GP9. So the very brief, just wanted to put those up there for you to see as a short recap of that meeting. And then I wanted to pass it back to you for discussion on things to possibly add or modify from the previous year guidelines.
So the guidelines from previous years, the other attached document that we all have. I don't know if it's helpful or not for us to bring it up on screen. We can, of course, or Stephen, you could help us do that. But you'll see in here, these were the list of guiding principles that we set out last year. So I think it'd be helpful if we have comments, updates, or changes. We want to make sure that this document actually reflects those high level items that we just went through from our previous conversation. So I'll open it up for, you know what I will do first, because I said I would take public comment on this topic. So why don't I do that while you guys are perusing? I will pause and take a moment to see if there's any public comment in the room or on the Zoom on this topic. No? Okay, seeing none, then we can have our board discussion. Also, Superintendent, if there's anything, I know you're taking a fresh look at this, if you had any reactions, thoughts that might help trigger discussion, since we were all here when we did this before.
Great, thanks. Well, my first observation, comparing to last year's budget development guidelines, is that the second page refers back to specifics in, I have to look back and toggle GP. Oh, I just lost it. EL4, EL5, and GP9. So I don't know we need to restate that because there's a reference to, so it sort of feels like this could look like a laundry list to some people, but it's actually supposed to be within the bounds of our governing, processes and policies, as well as our executive limitations. So there's some things that are mixed in there from that, in addition to, there might be a different way to express some of these, such as also taking into account strategic plan, which would not have been something for consideration last year to include.
I think one of the areas that's maybe not well articulated in the document is some of the conversations I know we've had in the past that have been important. So I'll table it around I guess I'll call it the equitable distribution of budget across the system. And so how are we ensuring that high need or higher need is also more highly resourced, and that may be one item that we want to consider at least calling out and making a bit more plain in these guidelines.
Right, it's almost like we're in the bottom bullet in the program that allows students to provide targeted resources to combat the COVID pandemic. I don't know that we need that necessarily called out, but maybe what we need to call out is, targeted intervention for gap closing. Another thing that I don't know, and maybe it's someplace here, but I'm not quite sure, is especially after reading ends 2, is around curriculum. There were several places in there where curriculum was being called out, and the challenges of, falling behind in our curriculum adoption. So I'm not sure what that falls into.
And what do you think you might want to see here about that? Like that we would.
Well, it has to be taken into consideration as part of the overall. That isn't something we can have suffer year after year.
Well, except that as we go through the process of another round of budget cuts, curriculum adoption is one of the things we look at. Now, I can't say that it's going to rise to the top of the list, nor should it, but I'm not sure why you would specifically call out curriculum as opposed to a lot of other.
No, just that as long as it is not forgotten. Because part of the curriculum also helps us meet all of these. It's just one of those things that just kept getting called out in the prior end.
And we've heard it from our staff, for instance, about middle school math as an example. So
Don't misunderstand me.
Yeah.
I'm not arguing that we shouldn't adopt curriculum. I'm just not sure.
Because I'm not saying directing it to be.
Yeah.
But it's one of the many on the priority list.
Right. And that's why I'm not sure I'd want to call it out specifically. I mean, we talk about a program that allows students to meet grad requirements and meet standards, and curriculum is all part of that, but it is up to teaching and learning and the academic group of, is curriculum the most critical way of doing that, or is something else?
Right. It goes to the priorities that will have to be addressed.
For the same reason that superintendent is saying, do we need to call out specific things that are already in the ELs?
Right.
I'm not
Don't be
sure I would
duplicating.
specifically call that out. Although, gosh, I'm really uncomfortable taking out the fund balance, 3 to 7%. But I guess it is in the ELs.
Well, we could also reference the ELs.
Yeah,
'cause
I
it
mean, we
also-
have
it
a
also-
general reference on the ELs, but we don't call out specific ones.
Yeah.
So I guess to that point about curriculum or other program, I think what for me might be helpful is if there, in the PowerPoint, there is a comment on providing a menu of options for consideration. And so if a part of that menu of options for consideration included, I guess, recency of update of key programs, so that as part of decision-making, we could understand if there are aging concerns in a particular area or program that may need to have some update. If something was just updated, I can't think of a specific example, but if there's things up for potential cut that haven't been updated and need to be, that were 10 years old versus something that we just updated last year, that information as part of that menu might be helpful, like most recent update and desired need for update or forecast for next update, maybe something like that could be helpful.
Mhm. Well, and these are our guidelines to develop the budget, but it doesn't really address the process of which we're going to develop a budget. Like your concept of, menu of options.
Mhm.
That is why we delineated these two, because we did hear a mix of process
Right.
feedback as well as direction for prioritization, like the sort of values behind which frame we'd be approaching even the development of a menu of options.
Right.
One thing that I just heard back from Director Weaver was about the specificity. It was sort of a combination of Director Moore and Director Weaver. So in some cases, it's super specific around program elements for academics, in which case that creates that automatically prioritizing that as not being part of the menu of options for reduction or removal from our budget. So that could lead to less creativity and flexibility as we discuss what those options could be.
I can't see the hands in Zoom, so Director Gallinger, if you happen to have it up, you can feel free to just go ahead and talk.
Oh, I do. Can you just reframe for me, Director Mullins? What are we doing right now?
We are right now, because as we're kicking off the start of the budgeting process, in past years, specifically last year, I remember, we leveraged this document, the one that's titled Board of Directors Budget Development Guidelines, in order to give initial guidelines to the administration as they looked at forming their budget. So our activity at the moment is to just say, if we look at this, does this still represent what we believe is the messaging we want them to take into that process? Or is there any updates we'd want to see now so that when we get back options on the budget, they reflect, the guidance we want to seek, so we don't have a disconnect when we start to look at actual proposed budgets?
Got it. So yes. So my feedback would be I would eliminate the COVID one because I don't think that's necessary anymore. And then I would recommend we create a new section, Roman numeral 3, that would encapsulate some of our thoughts on, in consideration of potential budget cuts. However, people that are like Director Weaver are far better at wording than I will ever be. But in consideration of budget cuts, potential budget cuts, we would like the district to consider these things. Because one of them for me would be, to the greatest extent possible, maintaining supports for students. We've heard from Dr. Moore about curriculum. So I think that would be where a section could kind of illustrate what we really want to make sure rises to the top or falls to the bottom, either way you want to look at it. That would be my recommendation, because I think what we have here for 1 and 2 are probably good and have served us well and will continue to serve us well. But what's unique about these several budget cycles and why this maybe is not scratch the edge that it normally does is because it's really, we want to provide early direction and context for the looming conversations ahead. Just my thoughts.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. I think that aligns with some of the other, at least it does for me, which is in that same section. I would include, again, we'll figure out the right wording, but that we are looking at how we allocate resourcing based on need throughout the system would be one that I would want to have added there.
I think going back to that COVID bullet, I kind of liked what Director Moore was saying, that instead of referencing targeted resources to combat COVID, we talk about targeted intervention for gap closing, which sort of is part of the COVID recovery, but it's more general in terms of it. COVID isn't the only reason we have gaps. And I think we do, I like keeping in that thing of targeted resources really to areas of need, what you were talking about, and we can call it gap closing areas of need whatever you want to call it. But I agree we lose the reference to COVID-19, but I don't think I want to lose the whole bullet.
And I guess I could live with that, but I would think that it would potentially belong better in a new section where it says in the consideration of any potential cuts, whether you want to use menu of options or not, that we still prioritize to ensure that we're funding to meet the greatest needs, or however you want to phrase it. So, or it can be in both places. But I really, to carry through with what Director Mullings is saying, is when we do this, we still want to make sure that equity is at the heart of how we're funding the system. And that's going to be the only way we close gaps. If we were to like just cut everyone's hair a little shorter, we're not actually going to get us where we need to go.
I think I'm pushing back a little bit, and I'm not sure why, but it feels to me like, I don't know, in the interest of brevity, that section 1, the budget should direct resources towards, and we list the things that we want to be sure we're funding. And, you know, we talk about remediation, acceleration, non-core options. We could insert something about gap closing or targeting resources to specific things. And it feels to me like that is in fact a list of the board priorities. And so obviously when you are talking about cuts, you have to consider that those are the board priorities. So those are not the things you cut. It feels almost redundant to come up with a laundry list of things that we want you to consider when you're budget cutting. I don't know, it just feels like it should be there. Feels like we've already said it. And if we haven't already said it, then maybe we need to beef that up rather than having a section 3.
I would say I think we've already said it for the past 2 years, and what's been brought to us has not been something that's been acceptable or digestible by the board. So,
And I was going to say, and that's true, because these guidelines have been the same and there have been struggles the last couple of years, but some of that is the process and the timing of which we are involved in the process.
Well, and to what extent were these guidelines looked at during that process of coming and bringing us cuts? Or was it more?
Yeah, it wasn't a continuity.
Or was it more, well, we're really going to have to take these cuts out of levy dollars to what's funded by the levies. And that's what we're going to have to cut. I mean, so it's like, what's the rationale from the business office to bring us cuts? What is going to be workable under their system versus what our guidelines are? Because that's it, in a way, that's what it really comes down to. So how do we create this guideline when it will be particular programs funded through levies essentially? Right. So if it's basic education that's paid for out of the state, those dollars goes towards those programs. And so what we're talking about is how do we utilize those other dollars, whether it's LAP dollars, title dollars, levy dollars, those other pieces of the circle that come in, and where do we leverage them? Where can we make cuts based on where are we really losing the money?
But the cuts don't have to come from the levies. I mean, that was sort of the problem we got into last year when we made a cut of something that we had told the public was going to be funded by levy dollars. And the response was, well, we passed your levy, so why are you cutting this? You told us the levy would fund it. So I'm not sure that is where the cuts come from.
So, and maybe that's the evaluation is, I don't know how those decisions were made. Was it based off of this document, or was it just based on what was going to work best for the system to cut? And I don't know.
So a couple things I'm hearing, so I'll just revalidate. One is, regardless of the sections or their numbering, we have an opportunity to look at how we're explicitly stating some of the value items, such as that we want to make sure we're maintaining supports for students, allocating resources to need, targeting intervention for gap closing, so we can figure out where's the best placement within the document. It also sounds like we want to include some of the expected process items within the document, things like level or timeliness of involvement, options that are presented in the process. Is that fair? Did I heard that correctly?
Does that belong here? I'm sorry, say that last bit again.
It sounds like there's a want of formalizing some of the process steps when we're involved, the leveraging of this document in the creation of the budget. And so that's what I'm trying to get to. Is that what we're trying to get to? Is should we augment this document with some of those process pieces? Is that the direction that the conversation you're having is going, or am I hearing that incorrectly?
I think, I may say this wrong too. I think there was an assumption on our part that this document was guiding the budget cut process. But to Director Meraldo's point, I'm not sure that actually happened. And so I think the board can say now that we expect the budget cutting process to be working off of this document. Do we have to say that explicitly in the document? I'm not sure. I think that is sort of,
I mean, I think you just said
it's
it.
implicit, right? These are budget development guidelines. So if you're going to make cuts, we expect you to follow the guidelines. I would agree that I'm not sure that happened. But I think we're being pretty clear right now that we expect it to. So I don't know if we need to include that in the document.
Well, and I think your very last bullet point is not to create obligations over the long term, then revenues can be safely projected, or fail to establish provisions for modifying obligations in the event of revenue loss. So that's kind of the overall encompassing, well, there's my guideline. I got to make sure I don't do that. So how do we ensure that actually it's the first part, which is why it's first, that's the key for what we want in the budget. We want to fund these things. The second part two is we have to fund these things, right? We have to meet our obligations. We have to have insurance. Those are the things that are in part two, are the not very luxurious, not really education focused, classroom focused items. So the first part is really what's in the classroom. And the second part is what's operational. And you kind of have to do. I do want you to get insurance for us. And that cost. So that last one ends up being this catch-all that I think was used. So somebody could say, well, you did use your budget guidelines. They gave you a budget that didn't go over what you could pay for.
Right. And actually,
Which actually
to be honest,
did.
opposite. They actually wanted more cuts because they knew that the budget that we had that ultimately was approved was more than we could really afford.
Right.
And so they really did want to be able to cut more to better meet that need. But of course, what they were faced with was creating a budget that would be approved. So we can sit here and say all this and still not like the budget they come back with because we don't want those cuts.
Yeah.
But the reality is we need to align our expenses with our revenues.
Mm-hmm.
But we can still do that in a time frame that is not feeling like it's a forced decision.
Oh, I agree
Yes.
that the process needs more. We need to be engaged more and have more touches on the process and the items that end up being in it. So I'm not disagreeing with that.
So then if we don't outline this in writing, how do we then have accountability, Suzanne? That's my question and concern. Like I certainly, like 2 years in a row, like a third year, I guess I'm not convinced. Like we had a very similar conversation pre-budget last year on what we expected to see and when from a time frame standpoint, and that wasn't delivered. So I think for me, I'm a little gun shy to be like, oh, well, they've heard us. I mean, but like they've heard us before. So
Thanks, sorry.
Well, and I think maybe that's what your number 3 is. So number 1, programs, educational programs we want funded and how we want that to look. Number 2 is operational, what we want that to look like. And 3 is the timeline to bringing us any budget, whether it's budget cuts or not. So what is our involvement? Let's say we were to get this, the legislature came back and they said, oh, we are now going to fully fund special education. And we now have 12 million, waving of hands. And we suddenly have $12 million that we didn't have that we could then. So maybe the third one is, how do you bring us back a budget? So our budget guidelines and our budget guiding document is not only what you bring us, but how you bring it to us.
Right, with like timeframes, like I would want to see a menu of potential budget cuts no later than the first board meeting in March.
So what I'm hearing, it does sound like there's some refresh that has to happen with this to update it for current year with some additional suggestions to test back with the board.
Yep.
We would not want to go and start tracking changes based on what we think, right? That would be out of step of having the conversation, which is why we wanted to have this conversation now. And I understand your point, Director Gallagher, about having had that conversation last year in the pre-budget phase. I will also note that this document was not approved until April of last year. And so that was quite far. Sorry, I got verification from Diane that this was, we can strike that from the comments right now. We cannot forget. However, my hope is that we played back to what we thought we heard, right, from the last conversation, which I believe is a step towards saying that we heard those things. And now we want to see how that can work its way into this next part, which is developing the guidelines that, to Director Gallagher's point, is, yeah, it's our mutual accountability. And there are items I can imagine saying that the board has brought a timeline, right, by, every year that gets part of the approval for, but obviously the timeline might have to shift based on future discussion. So we can, our hope is that this is different this year, right? And the intent is to be communicating regularly, frequently, getting clear alignment, but also being able to check in along the way to ensure that we are still in alignment of the priorities. So to me, this is a very important document. It is also a very important document to Martin and the larger cabinet and finance and operations team. So I can imagine there's some tweaking that would have to happen anyways, but we also are working to support that to make sure that we are also aligned throughout the process. I don't know if that met the needs, but I was thinking what it could look like.
No, super helpful. And I think maybe the opportunity is if we can have one or two members of the board who would want to come together and put together what we think a good version of this document would look like, so that we can review it and then get it approved in a timely fashion. And it includes those things we want to ensure the budget funds, as well as the timeline and way in which we want to be engaged, so that we have clear direction. So my goal would be to see if of the board, if there are two takers who would take that on.
I mean, I'm hesitant to volunteer because I don't think I'm quite in line with what other people seem to want in a section 3. My brain is still thinking that if we feel that we have enough specificity in section 1, and I take the superintendent's point that we could probably clean up section 2 and get rid of some of those bullets, but I think I would want to call out specific ELs just to make, because there's some really critical things in there that I don't want to say, oh, we're just in compliance with the ELs. I want to call out the ones that talk about the critical things, but I agree, we don't actually have to list critical things. But I'm still in a place where if the district comes and says, okay, we can achieve all of these educational goals, and we would recommend these budget cuts to keep us in alignment, then I kind of go back to the policy governance thing of, well, they're going to achieve the goals. They think they can do it with these cuts. Now, I realize the board has a responsibility to play in there, so I'm not just throwing my hands up and abdicating. Don't misunderstand. I think the problem we got into last year was we had a meeting, there was a list of options, and we could vote yes or no, but if we voted no, we were to the point where we just were saying we're not cutting the budget. So we either had to approve the cuts in front of us, or we had to not have cuts, and there needed to be another iteration where we could give feedback and say, yeah, we know we need the cuts, but oh, do they have to be these? But But I don't know how much of that needs to be, because I think this conversation is really clear to the different people who are sitting in those seats this year from last year. And I don't know how much of that actually has to be forced into the document. So I might not be the best person to help edit the document.
First, I would challenge it and say that if Suzanne and I can come to an
Perfect.
agreement, that we would probably
I was
in the
afraid.
consensus of the board.
I think that's a great idea.
I think that's a perfect, I was
You know what? I
actually
love
that
those names that came up because none of them sounded like Marnie.
a perfect
Yeah.
partnership, because I do think there are, I think, I personally think that there is an opportunity to be more clear on the approach we take to get to understanding the brinksmanship of last year was not comfortable. And I don't think there's anything wrong with writing some of that down. And so if you both would agree to work together on this and update the document, I think that would be a fantastic outcome.
And let me guess, you're looking to have that at the next board meeting?
Or at least by the first March.
I think
February?
the first one of February,
So
where my brain goes, but
Because we're
It's-
not all
we're-
gonna be there
what, which one?
Wait, what are-
at the end of January.
and yeah,
Oh,
we'll
we're
have
not?
some
No.
member
We'll come back to
absences
that,
the
'cause-
end of
but-
January.
I think as soon as fast as we can, as slow as we must. So I would
Yeah.
phrase that way because this is intentional discussion. It's important. And also we are entering a turn immediately, right? After this is to then be able to set up those options. So we need that guidance and prioritization as well. So
Right,
we're
and I
happy.
want the board to be the
Got
roadblock
it.
to the timely execution of
We-
this whole thing.
We are also happy to provide some suggestions that that's helpful based on what we heard that you can then take and run with. So
Mhm.
it's not to say it's overwriting the voice of the board in this process, but it is, you are busy people, as we said in the opening, you are volunteers and you have dual lives and in different spaces. So we're happy to try and do our best to give you something that you can jump off of and also support you in whatever way you need.
I love that suggestion. I think we will take it. Suzanne and Harlan, I think will be a great combination. I would also suggest that this work by the board should not stop parallel processing on what you might
No.
do to gather information, gather feedback, start to put together what you think are wonderful proposals. Sorry, Director Moore, were you going to say something?
No, you can finish what you're saying, but I do want to say something.
Okay, so thank you for that volunteerism. We appreciate getting that draft, and I think we will look for the first board meeting in February to bring that back, Director Moore.
Well, why don't we bring it back for the board retreat? That way we'll all be there. And
February-
that's
Or on the
early
10th.
February.
February 1st.
That might be a good place for us to.
I thought the next board meeting was
The retreat's on the
But that's-
1st.
Do you need
Yeah,
to do
but
a
that's after the board meeting.
No, the February 10th it's after the 26th. What if you guys had a
No,
draft?
Don't we have a board meeting on the 9th?
Yes, but the retreat's on,
So I'm saying if
Oh,
we
the
talk
10th.
about it at the retreat.
Oh,
we've
yes,
missed
yes.
2 board meetings.
I had the wrong date for the retreat. I see it's on the 10th. I wonder if you guys could give us a draft before the 26th that we could.
I mean,
start
I'm out of
looking
town
at.
for the next few
Oh.
days, but that still gives me a week. So
It's
if
up
I
to-
can get with Harlan sometime between the 19th and the 23rd,
Well,
we could hammer something out.
And I can give any of my feedback to
That would be good.
President Mullings.
We
then-
we
oh.
can give you suggestions before when you're back in town, Director Weaver. So you and Director Gallagher could have something in your inbox based on what we heard from this conversation
Okay.
that you could build off of.
So
That'll help you.
so
And then-
we'll shoot for the 126 then to do it.
Yeah, for at least a
To
first
look.
read, yeah.
Okay,
Okay, but now, this is what
Because
I
I
really
think we
wanted
should.
to say. Just one moment. I apologize. I looked back and I believe we really did do the budget development guideline last year in April. And that is disappointing that it took us that long to do that. So that's my apology because I was just so taken aback that we would have waited that long.
It
And
does feel wrong.
it
but-
does, and it does, and it probably was. And I was board president, so I'll take responsibility for that. So I apologize. Wanted to say that.
Well, and I wanted to say, as we have this discussion, difficult decisions are going to be made. And so what I appreciate is that at least we're going to have something available to staff for us to really be able to better prepare for this. And, you know, it is hard because it just comes down to budget cuts will impact students, it will impact staff. And there's just no way that that doesn't happen. And so it's just even starting this conversation now is heartbreaking because you know that what the result's going to be. But, you know, again, this has been a long term. We know that COVID put us in a very, very difficult space because we did not get the funding from the federal government, the support from them for all that we put into it. And we continue to not get that through special education as a whole. They don't fund what they've promised us for year after year, and it continues, that hole gets bigger and bigger. And so I think that's, and we're going to feel the meat of that come April.
Very well said. And so I think we're doing a much better job already by starting this conversation early and getting to a first read by end of this month on what the guidance will look like and allowing the district to have more time and have a more interactive process. So thank you. Thank you for that conversation. Our next, we will move forward unless there's any other final comments on that one. We're clear. Okay, the next section of the agenda is legislative matters. Director Gallinger, do you have any updates?
I would just say that this week the legislature convened and it's been a parade of people speaking to the legislature, whether that's the governor or Superintendent Reichdahl. So I encourage you to listen to his outline and map of prioritization and then match that with what the proposed budget he gave out for prioritization in September. So it's really early right now. And the question I would ask is there anything particular you want me to prepare for the visit to Olympia? I had mentioned earlier, but I hadn't seen board consensus on this because I think I'd mentioned it to our superintendent. The last time we were in Olympia, because it's been a while, we did coordinate a visit with DCYF. And that may seem like a long time ago, but that was like the last time we were in Olympia. So don't know if that's something that the board would be interested in doing again as a touch point, or if there's any other particular types of encounters or visits that you want me to get set up as we prepare for our legislative day.
Arlen, can I just ask a question? Because I did not hear I know Superintendent Reichdahl did a speech and I have not listened to it yet. Is he focused on special ed as a priority?
He is, but in my mind, it's at the expense of regionalization. So for us, it's a net negative.
Oh,
It's kind of like give it to you with one hand and take it away with the other.
and we lose. Of course, we always lose. Okay, and just FYI, I am not going to be able to be at legislative conference this year.
So who all is going to Ledge Conference? Harlan, are you going to be there?
I won't be at Ledge Conference, but I'll be there for the Day on the Hill part.
Okay, so okay, that's good to know. So you won't be there on the Sunday part, but you'll be there on the Monday part.
Right. I'll get into Olympia late that night.
Okay, great.
Because of that's the last day of vacation. So
Yeah, no, that's why, to clarify, because I was thinking maybe you wouldn't be able to be there for either, but that's great.
I would say the other piece about the special ed funding is that it is likely what they keep talking about is raising the cap, meaning, which is not going to help us at all. We don't even come close to the cap as far as there's a cap on the number of special ed, what percentage of special ed students they'll fund. And so they think, oh, if we raise the cap, then that will give you more money that you have available. But if we're not at the cap, it doesn't help us any. So I think that's going to be a challenge.
Back to Director Gallinger's question, are there any that we know of now, items for his scheduling or to assist with the DCYF meeting? That was 3 years ago we did that, right?
Well, it would have been 19 because we
19.
didn't go in 2020.
And that was interesting because there was a focus on ECHO.
We did 2020.
We did
Did we go in
2020.
2020? Oh,
Closures happened in March, like March 17th. Thing.
March.
right.
Okay. So
Okay,
was-
yeah, and it was in February
2020.
then.
And so any initial thoughts for result? Okay, otherwise we can get those back to him.
Well, I think it's because really DCYF is our relationship about Echo Glen is the
Right.
biggest piece. So I think it's based on, I would want a recommendation on whether or not we're in a spot to be able to meet with them, if that meeting would be positive. I think is one of those questions that, where are we at in our relationship with them right now to be meeting?
Yeah, do we have a need there? Right? to
And
make that our
do we have the
priority?
goodwill to be?
Yeah, that too.
I mean, I would say we have goodwill. There's been great partnership. The fact that I was able to consult with one of the sources that was a DCYF representative about that article or editorial was testament. We've had since, conversation since, and there's been a lot of positive, intentional work to continue to partner together. So on one hand, it's about actually furthering that partnership potentially as well. So it's an option.
And I think some of us old timers here still have somewhat of a, maybe Ross Hunter would remember as Secretary Hunter and Frank Ordway, who is his chief of staff. They did. So I think there's still some goodwill in that area.
Okay, so that's a potential one as well. Okay, well, we can talk about in some more detail on that one. Director Gallagher, any other updates from you or maybe NSBA?
NSBA Advocacy Institute is coming up at the end of this month. And I really am going to be taking basically what Harlan has talked about with special ed and using that same information when we go on the Hill. And Harlan, are you still going to be able to join us for that? So I think, we'll be able to have those conversations. I have not been able to attend the federal relations meetings. They keep coinciding with other meetings I have to be at with work. So I need to catch up and find out as far as booking, scheduling appointments with both Representative Congresswoman Schreier and Congressman Smith to be able to do that. So because those are our two legislators that we would have more locally that touch our school district. But that's the primary one. I would say back to the state legislature because of my work with Influence of Choice. There are some things, especially around vaping, some laws that are being proposed around tobacco, where they would take away any consequences for youth actually having it, and that all the focus would be on retailers selling. So all of the mitigations as far as selling to youth would fall on the retailers, but youth possession, there would be literally no consequences whatsoever, not even a misdemeanor or a ticket or something. So I think we know that vaping is kind of an issue for a number of students in our schools, and it really impacts their ability to concentrate during the school day. It impacts the students around them that aren't using. It impacts our teachers who are like, what do I do? I can't really address these students are vaping in front of me. And do I want to call them out? What am I going to do? So it has a great impact. We don't know what they're vaping, when they're vaping. And there's a chance that the laws being put in place might actually drive students to go underground and black market items rather than getting it from a retailer, which then you don't know what's in it. There's on the East Coast, they're seeing fentanyl-laced vaping products that are being sold on the black market, and students don't know they're laced with fentanyl.
Thank you for that update. Thank you, Director Gallagher, for yours as well. We will move on to announcements and correspondence. They are in the agenda. If there are any additional that anyone would like to share.
I did have one additional, but I'll just forward it on to Diane.
Okay, I do have one I wanted to bring up. I know that I received invitation. I'm not sure if everyone did, but there is a Issaquah Youth Civic Engagement event. They are looking for participation from local government leaders. It is occurring on February 4th, from 2 to 4. It's actually happening at Gibson Neck. I know I will not be able to attend. So I don't know if there's anyone else who might consider being a part of that event where they're looking to drive more education amongst youth about public service and other items. They were hoping for a representative. If you want to let me know, I think they gave me a deadline of the 13th, so tomorrow. Gave us all, probably, I think we may have all
Yeah.
received it to do that. So for your consideration,
I'm sorry, do you remember what day it was?
February 4th of the week, I believe it's a Saturday.
Oh.
Did they ever say what time?
The time is 2 to 4 p.m. Downtown Issaquah, yep. Mayor Pauly, council members. They're hosting local volunteer organizations and public policy commissions, among other groups, with the intention of promoting civic engagement among local youth.
Marnie said.
I could be available.
Marnie said she
Oh.
could do it.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I think it would be. Yeah, I'll look through my emails. Who is it from?
It was from Matthew H. So we can talk about it later. If you think you can tonight, that would be great. On the Issaquah Youth Advisory Board. Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that.
Diane, I had a student email that asked me a question that I couldn't answer and I forwarded it to you. Were you able to get back to him? RH, I think. I can. Oh, you did. Okay. It's just, I didn't see it, so I wasn't sure. Okay. So that was my only correspondence.
Thank you for that. Okay, so next we have calendar and future agenda topics. I think the biggest item that we needed to discuss here is identifying a time for the board to meet to discuss a review process. And so I know we've started to have some discussions. One of the things that we committed to when our new superintendent joined us was early feedback. Our regular process has us doing that at the end of the year. And so in order for us to have time enough to have the conversation, to have a good conversation on that, we'll need to find time to do it. And so my hope is that if we can open up that conversation to see if potentially we could find a day, evening to do that in advance of our retreat, which for some reason I don't have written
In
down.
advance of the February 11th
The
retreat.
advance
I
of
mean,
February
February 10th.
The February 10th
Yeah.
retreat. That would be great.
I had volunteered a location.
A location has been volunteered to host that with Director Weaver.
So I'll just throw out a day to start with, January 17th.
On
Yeah,
Tuesday.
I won't be.
I'm not here.
I'm not available.
January 23rd or 24th.
Are we talking? And
I
we're
can't do the
talking,
24th.
Either of those is a winner for me.
Marnie said no to 24, but 20,
I'll be on a
oh,
plane.
right,
How about
23,
23?
23 works.
23 works.
It's
It
an
will be
exec-
considered a
would
special
be-
meeting, yes.
Yes, but it would be an exec session.
Which is why we would need to do it and approve it tonight because we don't
Right.
have the meeting.
No,
No,
No. Sorry, for some reason my calendar will not come up on the 20th.
that means you have nothing on it.
No, it
She
keeps
wishes.
Good
keeps
try.
skipping that date for some reason. 23rd. I think that could work. Evening of the 23rd.
Ooh.
Woot. Do you need a motion?
Yeah,
I will hear a motion.
Okay, I move that the board convene in a special meeting, an executive session, Monday, January 23rd at 6 p.m. at my home. Does it need an end time? Or can it just?
Doesn't need an
No,
end time.
usually we do it.
6 to 9?
Or 3 hours, about
3
3 hours, yeah.
Okay, 6 to 9 on January 23rd.
oh, second, sorry. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm
Aye.
Thank you. It's always best if you start with Harlan's calendar. That's the
It
winning.
really is.
That's the winning one. If there are no other topics this evening, then I will consider this meeting adjourned.